The ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art glittered, but not as brightly as the diamonds on the women or the contempt in Grayson Vanderbilt's eyes. He stared at the necklace his wife Annalise had worn. It wasn't Cartier, it wasn't Van Cleef, it was hers, handmade. A curious, sunset-colored stone cradled in twisted silver. He laughed a sound that cut through the polite chatter. "My dear," he said loud enough for the trustees of the Whitney to hear, "did you win that in a claw machine? Please take it off. You're embarrassing the family name." This single moment of public humiliation was not the end of Annalise's story. It was the catalyst that would ignite a fire, transforming her from a society wife into the titan of a billion-dollar empire built on the very stone he mocked. The air in the Vanderbilt penthouse on Park Avenue was always thin-scrubbed of emotion and thick with the scent of old money and white orchids. For Annalise Rosenthal, it had been a beautiful prison for 7 years. Her marriage to Grayson Vanderbilt IV wasn't a love story. It was a merger. Her family had a respectable name in academia, but no real fortune. Grayson's family, the Vanderbilts of shipping and banking fame, had a fortune so vast it was practically a character. In their lives, a demanding patriarch dictating their every move. Annalise's role was simple: be beautiful, be silent, and produce an heir. She had succeeded at the first, perfected the second, and failed so far at the third. Her quiet rebellion came in the form of a small workshop tucked away in a spare room overlooking the less fashionable side of the building. There, with a simple torch, pliers, and sheets of silver, she made jewelry. It wasn't a hobby, it was a language. Each piece was a story, a feeling she couldn't otherwise express. She'd spend hours sketching designs inspired by architectural details she'd see on her lonely walks, or the unique mineral inclusions she'd find in stones bought from obscure dealers online. It was the only part of her life that was truly hers. The piece that would end her marriage was born from a place of deep sentimentality. It was a necklace centered around a peculiar stone she had bought for $75 from an old man's stall at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. He'd called it a fluke sapphire, too strange in color to be valuable. It was a mesmerizing stone, the color of a tropical sunset, shifting from a fiery orange-pink to a soft lavender, depending on the light. It reminded her of the one happy memory she had with Grayson, a fleeting sunset they had watched in Bali on their honeymoon before the weight of his name had fully descended upon them. She framed it in a nest of hand-wrought, oxidized silver, designed to look like a thorny protective branch. It was her heart translated into metal and mineral. She decided to wear it to the annual preservation gala at the Met. It was a bold move. The Vanderbilt women were expected to be draped in the family's vault collection, heavy historical pieces from Graff and Harry Winston that felt more like shackles than adornments. When she came down the grand staircase, Grayson's face, usually a mask of handsome indifference, tightened. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low and serrated. "I made it," Annalise said, a flicker of pride in her voice. "The stone reminded me of Bali." His eyes went flat. "It's sentimental junk. We're going to be photographed with the Rockefellers and the Lauders tonight. You will not wear that thing. Go upstairs and put on the Bulgari sapphires." "No," she said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "I want to wear this." Grayson's jaw clenched. He saw her refusal, not as a matter of taste, but as an act of defiance, a crack in the perfect facade of his life. He said nothing more, but the fury radiated from him, a cold aura that followed them into the chauffeured Bentley and through the flashbulbs on the museum steps. The humiliation, when it came, was masterful in its cruelty. They were standing in a circle with a US senator and a famous contemporary artist, Catherine Sachs. Catherine, known for her sharp eye, leaned in slightly. "Annalise, what a fascinating piece. The stone is extraordinary. What is it?" Before Annalise could answer, Grayson let out his booming laugh. It was a performance designed for maximum impact, a fascinating piece of what Catherine Annalise has a charming little hobby. She makes trinkets. He turned to Annalise, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. My dear, did you win that in a claw machine? It's sweet, but it's hardly appropriate for the Met. He then looked at the others, his smile wide and apologetic. You'll have to forgive her. She has a creative soul. Please, he said, his voice dropping, but still audible to everyone in their circle. Take it off. You're embarrassing the family name. Put it in your purse. The air froze. The senator gave a tight, uncomfortable smile. Catherine Saxe's eyes widened, a flicker of pity crossing her face before she looked away. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye was on her, on the necklace, on her shame. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution of her identity. He hadn't just called her necklace cheap. He had called her cheap. Her one private act of creation, her one piece of herself had been held up and declared worthless. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. A strange, chilling calm washed over her. She looked Grayson directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw something other than placid obedience. He saw a stranger. Without a word, she unclasped the necklace, its silver cool against her hot skin, and dropped it into her small beaded clutch. The rest of the night was a blur. She smiled. She nodded. She sipped her champagne. But inside, a 7-year dam of resentment and unspoken pain had shattered. She wasn't a Vanderbilt anymore. She was just Annalise Rosenthal, a woman holding a cheap stone in a ridiculously expensive purse. When they got home, the silence in the penthouse was screaming. You will never pull a stunt like that again. Grayson began untying his bow tie. You're right, Annalise said, her voice even. I won't. I want a divorce. Grayson stopped. He turned to look at her, a flicker of surprise followed by pure derision. A divorce? On what grounds that I saved you from looking like you shopped for your jewelry at a street fair? On the grounds that I'd rather live in a studio apartment in Queens and be myself than live in this mausoleum and be your accessory. His laughter this time was genuine and far crueler than it had been at the party. Don't be ridiculous. You have nothing. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You signed it. You walk away with the clothes on your back and a one-time settlement that wouldn't cover your Neiman Marcus bill for a single season. You'll come crawling back within a month. We'll see, she said, walking past him and towards the guest wing, where she locked the door. The Vanderbilt divorce was swift and brutal. Grayson's lawyers, a pack of sharks from Sullivan and Cromwell, painted her as an unstable, ungrateful woman. The prenup was indeed ironclad. As he had predicted, she was left with a fraction of what people assumed. The tabloids had a field day branding her the jilted jeweler. She moved out of the Park Avenue Palace and into a small, pre-war one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side that her settlement barely covered for a year. The silence was no longer screaming, it was just empty. She was alone, 32 years old, with a bruised reputation and a future that was a terrifying blank slate. In her small jewelry box, amidst the few designer pieces she was allowed to keep, sat the thorny silver necklace, its sunset stone seeming to mock her. It was the reason for her ruin, or so she thought. The first few months of Annalise's new life were a study in grey. The vibrant colours of the society pages were replaced by the monochrome reality of budgeting and grocery shopping. The catered lunches were gone, replaced by toast and coffee. The stream of invitations dried up to a trickle, then stopped completely. She was a ghost in the city that had once been her stage. Her days were long and empty, the silence of her small apartment a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. She sold off the designer bags and shoes. Grayson had let her keep the cash, a temporary buffer against the encroaching panic. Her gaze kept returning to the necklace. It sat on her dresser, a beautiful, painful artifact of her public execution. She hated it. She hated what it represented, her naivety, her husband's cruelty, her fall from grace. One rainy Tuesday, with her bank account dipping to a new terrifying low, she made a decision. She would sell it. Even if it was just for the silver, a few $100s was better than nothing. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She didn't go to the flashy jewelers in the Diamond District on 47th Street. The thought of their condescending eyes was too much to bear. Instead, she remembered a small dusty shop she'd once passed on a side street in Greenwich Village. It had a faded hand-painted sign that read Chadwick & Sons, Gemology and Antiquities. There was no Sons in sight, only a stooped elderly man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, who looked as ancient as the artifacts in his window. She pushed open the door, a small bell tinkling overhead. The shop smelled of old paper metal polish and dust. The man at the counter looked up from a loupe through which he was examining a Victorian-era cameo. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gravelly but kind baritone. I'd like to sell this," Annalise said, her voice barely a whisper. She laid the necklace on the worn velvet counter. Her hands trembled slightly. The man, Arthur Chadwick, picked it up. His touch was surprisingly gentle. He didn't look at the silverwork first, as she expected. His eyes were immediately drawn to the stone. He turned it over and over, holding it up to the weak light filtering through the window, then under the bright, focused beam of his desk lamp. He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The silver is lovely," he finally said, his gaze still fixed on the stone. "Delicate work, very organic. But this stone, where did you get this?" "A gem show in Tucson, a while ago. The seller said it was a fluke sapphire," Annalise explained, feeling the familiar sting of embarrassment. "I know it's not worth much, but I was hoping the silver—" "Not worth much," Arthur interrupted, looking at her over the top of his glasses for the first time. There was a strange intensity in his eyes. "My dear girl, the man who sold you this was either a fool or a thief who didn't know what he was stealing." He placed the stone under a microscope, fiddling with the focus knobs. He muttered to himself words like pleochroism, rutile silk, and uncharacteristic crystalline structure. Annalise stood awkwardly, assuming he was just being dramatic. After another 5 minutes, he pushed himself back from the microscope and took a deep, shaky breath. He looked at Annalise, his eyes wide. "This is not a fluke sapphire. This is a Padparadscha sapphire." "A what?" "Padparadscha. It's Sinhalese for lotus blossom. They are the rarest and most valuable of all sapphires. They have a very specific, delicate balance of pink and orange. A true Padparadscha is worth more per carat than a fine diamond. But this—" He trailed off, picking up the stone again. "This is something else entirely. I've never seen one that shifts color so dramatically. It's almost as if it has the color change properties of an alexandrite, but in the Padparadscha spectrum. It moves from lotus pink to a deep, fiery sunset orange. It's a chameleon." Annalise stared at him, uncomprehending. "So, it's valuable?" Arthur let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Valuable, young lady, the Hope Diamond is valuable. A Monet is valuable. This is singular. It's a geological anomaly. It's a new classification of gemstone. A 12-carat Padparadscha of fine quality might fetch $500,000 at auction. A stone like this, with this unique documented color change phenomenon, I can't even begin to put a price on it. It's a specimen stone of museum quality. To a collector, to a house like Cartier, or a scientific institution like the GIA, this stone is priceless." Annalise felt her knees go weak. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "Priceless. The man sold it to me for $75. "Then today is your lucky day," Arthur said, his expression turning serious. "But it's also a dangerous day. A stone like this doesn't just get sold over the counter. It needs to be certified, documented, and handled with extreme care. There are people who would kill for a stone like this." The irony was so thick, She could have choked on it. The cheap stone. The trinket she won in a claw machine. The source of her greatest humiliation was in fact a treasure of unimaginable worth. Grayson's mockery echoed in her head, but now it sounded different, not like the pronouncement of a king, but the braying of an ignorant fool. He, with all his inherited knowledge of luxury, with his family's vaults of important jewels, had stared at a miracle of nature and seen nothing but junk. He had judged its value based on its setting, not in a famous designer's platinum, but in her own humble silver. "What do I do?" Annalise asked, her mind reeling. Arthur saw the panic and confusion in her eyes. He saw the faint bruises of exhaustion under them, the expensive but slightly worn coat, the story of a woman adrift. "First," he said, his voice softening, "we get this properly documented. I have contacts at the Gemological Institute of America. We need to get a full report, a monograph. This will be its birth certificate, and it will be in your name. Annalise Rosenthal. Secondly, you need to decide what to do with it. You could sell it. A private sale to the right collector could set you up for life, for many, many lives." He paused, looking from the stone to her face. "Or you could do something else." "What else? A stone like this isn't just a commodity." Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a passion she recognized. It was the same passion she felt in her workshop. "It's a muse. It's the cornerstone of a legend. A woman who discovers a stone like this, who has the eye to see its beauty when no one else did. A woman who can craft a setting for it with her own hands. That woman doesn't just sell the stone, she builds a kingdom around it." In that dusty, forgotten shop, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's treasures, Annalise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years' hope. But it was more than that. It was a fierce, burning sense of purpose. Arthur Chadwick hadn't just appraised her stone, he had appraised her, and for the first time since her world had crumbled, someone had seen her true worth. Selling the stone would be an ending. It would be money security, a comfortable, quiet life. It would be a final, silent victory over Grayson. But building something, that would be a beginning. It would be a roar. "Tell me more about building a kingdom," she said, her voice no longer a whisper. The decision was made. Annalise would not sell the stone. The Rosenthal Chameleon, as the GIA officially named it in their stunning monograph, would not be a quick payday. It would be her seed capital, her silent partner, her statement of intent. The GIA certification process was arduous and exhilarating. Arthur Chadwick guided her through it, his connections opening doors that would have been welded shut to a woman with no industry credentials. The final report was more than a document. It was a validation. It described the stone's unique triclinic crystal system and the trace elements of manganese and chromium that caused its unprecedented color shift, officially valuing it for insurance purposes at a staggering 18 million. The number was so absurd, it felt like fiction. Annalise, however, did not sell. Instead, she leveraged. She, with the GA certificate and Arthur as her venerated advisor, she secured a heavily collateralized loan against a fraction of the stone's value. It wasn't the full $18 million. No bank was that audacious, but it was enough. She walked out of a private bank, not with a check, but with a credit line of $4 million. It was the most terrifying and liberating moment of her life. Her first move was not to rent a lavish office or hire a firm. It was to fly to Antwerp, the world's diamond capital, with Arthur. But she wasn't there for diamonds. She was there to meet the cutters, the brokers, the families who dealt in the rarest colored gemstones. Guided by Arthur, she didn't go to the big, sterile exchanges. She went to the small, multi-generational workshops in the back alleys, where masters who could trace their lineage back centuries still cut stones by hand and eye. She didn't buy what was fashionable. She bought what spoke to her. She bought a suite of unheated lavender spinels from Burma that glowed from within. She bought a seafoam green tourmaline from Mozambique that was so heavily included with fibrous crystals It looked like a frozen storm. She acquired a parcel of raw, uncut emeralds from a small Colombian mine, not for their clarity, but for the dramatic dark carbon gardens trapped within them. The established houses would have rejected these stones as flawed. Annalise saw them as having character. She believed perfection was sterile. The flaws were the stone's signature, its story. This became the core philosophy of her brand. She named her company simply Annalise. All caps, no frills, a declaration. Her next target was an investor. The bank loan was for materials and setup, but to build a global brand, she needed strategic capital and expertise. She set her sights on one person, Isabel Moreau, the notoriously shrewd head of Moreau Capital, a venture fund specializing in disruptive luxury. Isabel was known as the Ice Queen of Parisian finance, a woman who had built her fortune by betting on underdog brands and then molding them into powerhouses. She rarely took meetings without a seven-figure introduction. Annalise got the meeting through sheer audacity. She sent a courier directly to Isabel's office on the Place Vendôme. The package contained no business plan, no pitch deck. It contained a single perfect lavender spinel set in a simple temporary silver ring she had made herself, and a handwritten note, "Perfection is boring. Let's have a conversation about the beauty of the imperfect." Annalise Rosenthal. 2 days later, she was summoned to Paris. Isabel Moreau's office was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and grey marble overlooking the glittering jewelry houses she so often competed with. Isabel herself was in her late 40s, with razor-sharp black hair and eyes that seemed to conduct a full financial audit in a single glance. "You have 10 minutes, Isabel said, not bothering with pleasantries. The spinel sat on her desk. "Your stone is intriguing. Your method of introduction is either arrogant or brilliant. Convince me." Annalise didn't talk about profit margins or market share. She told her story. She spoke of her workshop in the Vanderbilt penthouse, a secret garden of creativity. She talked about the soul of stones, how the inclusions in an emerald were a fingerprint of the earth itself, how the subtle color variations in a sapphire told a story of its violent volcanic birth. She laid out her vision, a luxury jewelry house that celebrated not flawless cold perfection, but character narrative and the raw, untamed beauty of nature. Each piece would be one of a kind, built around a unique stone, its design an extension of that stone's intrinsic story. "The world doesn't need another Tiffany's," Annalise said, her voice steady. "We don't need another showcase of massive flawless diamonds that say nothing but, 'I'm rich.' People, a new generation of discerning women, are craving authenticity. They want a piece of jewelry that is as unique as they are, a piece that has a soul. We will not sell jewelry. We will sell talismans. We will sell stories." She finished by sliding the GIA monograph for the Rosenthal chameleon across the desk. "And this is our legend. The stone my ex-husband called cheap. It will not be for sale. It will be the heart of the company, the crown jewel of our private collection, a symbol of seeing value where others see none." Isabel was silent. She picked up the spinel again, turning it in the light. She read the cover of the GIA report. She looked at Annalise, her face unreadable. "The luxury market is built on heritage and perception," Isabel finally said, her tone clinical. "You have no heritage. Your perception is currently that of a tabloid figure. Your ex-husband is a Vanderbilt. They could crush you with a single press release." "Let them try," Annalise replied, her chin held high. "They represent the old guard, the idea that value is dictated by a name brand and a price tag. We represent the new world where value is intrinsic, personal, and authentic. Their attack will only amplify our message." A slow smile spread across Isabel Moreau's face. It was the first crack in her icy facade. "You are either completely insane or you are the future. I find both possibilities profitable." She stood and extended a hand. "Welcome to the Place Vendôme, Ms. Rosenthal. Let's go build your empire. The next year was a whirlwind. With Isabel's backing, Annalise established her atelier not in a flashy storefront, but in a private appointment-only salon in a historic Soho loft. She hired a small team of master jewelers, artisans, who felt stifled by the rigid designs of the major houses and yearned for creative freedom. She was a demanding creative director, obsessing over every detail from the exact alloy of 22-carat gold they used warmer and richer than the standard 18K to the hand-stitched silk pouches each piece was delivered in. The first collection, Origin, was unveiled not at a splashy party, but through a quiet exclusive, showing for a handful of influential editors, stylists, and private clients. There were only 30 pieces. One was a ring featuring the storm-tossed Mozambique tourmaline, set in blackened gold, that climbed the stone like lightning. Another was a pendant with a Colombian emerald, its internal garden enhanced by a halo of tiny raw diamond crystals looking like captured dewdrops. The response was electric. The pieces were unlike anything else on the market. They were bold, emotional, and unapologetically unique. An editor from Vogue Paris called them living sculptures. A powerful high-tech billionaire known for her iconoclastic style bought 3 pieces on the spot. Annalise was born. It was a quiet birth, but the shockwaves were beginning to spread. Up on Park Avenue, in a penthouse filled with perfect orchids and passionless jewels, the news was received first with derision, then with a flicker of annoyance. Grayson Vanderbilt read a small feature on the brand in a trade magazine and scoffed. His little ex-wife was still playing with her trinkets. He had no idea that the cornerstone of her new empire was the very stone he had tried to shame her with, and that the kingdom she was building was designed to cast a very, very long shadow. The growth of Annalise was not explosive. It was a slow, inexorable burn that grew hotter with each passing season. Isabel Marot's strategy was masterful. They eschewed traditional advertising, focusing instead on strategic placements and cultivating an air of exclusive mystique. Annalise's creations began appearing in the wild, but only on the most discerning tastemakers. The first major coup came during awards season. A-list actress Scarlett Johansson, known for her sophisticated and slightly edgy style, eschewed the usual offerings from the heritage brands. On the Oscars' red carpet, she wore a single, breathtaking piece from Annalise, a cuff earring that climbed the length of her ear, crafted from warm yellow gold and featuring a cascade of honey-colored sphene, a gemstone known for its fiery dispersion, which Annalise had sourced from a small mine in Madagascar. It was a statement. The piece was discussed on every fashion recap, praised for its originality and artistry. When reporters asked who the designer was, Johansson smiled and said, "It's an Annalise. You wouldn't know her, yet." That single quote was worth more than a $10 million ad campaign. Suddenly, "It's an Annalise" became a whisper, a piece of insider jargon among the ultra-wealthy and the fashion-forward. The brand was no longer just a curiosity, it was a phenomenon. Forbes ran a feature titled, "The Alchemist of Soho, How Annalise Rosenthal is Turning Flawed Gems into High-Fashion Gold." The article touched upon her divorce, framing the cheap jewelry story, not as a humiliation, but as the brand's heroic origin myth. In the Vanderbilt sphere, the news was now impossible to ignore. Grayson first saw the Forbes article on his tablet while breakfasting on the terrace of his penthouse. His new partner, a woman named Cassandra Davenport, whose family fortune was in pharmaceuticals, slid the tablet back across the marble table. "Isn't that your starter wife?" Cassandra drawled, her voice smooth and polished. "How quaint, the alchemist of So. A bit dramatic for someone selling glorified arts and crafts. Don't you think?" Grayson forced a chuckle, but a knot of irritation tightened in his stomach. He remembered the necklace from the Met. He remembered its strange sunset-colored stone. He scanned the article, his eyes catching the valuation of her company, a speculative but nonetheless jarring number. It's a fad. The fashion world loves a sob story. It will burn out in 6 months. But it didn't burn out. The waiting list for a bespoke Annalise piece grew to over a year. Annalise opened a second private salon in a secluded courtyard off the Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris, and a third in a discreet penthouse suite in Hong Kong. She was selective about her clients, cultivating a base of women who were leaders in their fields: artists, scientists, CEOs, and philanthropists. She wasn't just selling them jewelry, she was anointing them into a tribe. To own an Annalise piece was to signal that you had taste, individuality, and substance. It was a rejection of the kind of cookie-cutter luxury that the name Vanderbilt represented. The real shift in Grayson's perception came during Art Basel in Miami. He and Cassandra were attending the exclusive VIP preview, a sea of collectors and billionaires. Across the room, he saw an old business associate, a formidable German industrialist named Friedrich Hoffmann, talking to a woman. The woman was Annalise. She was not the timid, deferential creature he had known. She was poised, dressed in a simple but exquisitely cut black dress. Her only adornment, a pair of earrings made from raw geometric pyrite crystals set in gold. She was laughing, holding Hoffmann's attention completely. Then Grayson saw it. On the wrist of Hoffmann's elegant wife, Helga, was a bracelet. It was a massive cuff of hammered gold, centering a single enormous seafoam green tourmaline, the very one Annalise had bought in Antwerp, the one that looked like a frozen storm. It was magnificent, a piece of primal savage beauty. It made the flawless 10-carat diamond bracelet on Cassandra's wrist look sterile and predictable by comparison. "Is that?" Cassandra began, her voice tight with disbelief. "Helga, darling?" she called out, pulling Grayson along as she crossed the room, her smile a predatory slash of red lipstick. "What an absolutely savage bracelet! Who is the designer?" Helga Hoffmann, a woman who was famously impervious to flattery, beamed with genuine delight. "Oh, it's an Annalise, of course. She designed it just for me. The stone's inclusions are meant to represent the turmoil of the Baltic Sea near our summer home. Isn't that brilliant?" She gestured toward Annalise. "Annalise, you remember Grayson, I assume?" The air crackled. Annalise turned, her expression calm and unreadable. Her eyes hadn't met Grayson's. There was no fear, no anger, no pain. There was just a cool level assessment. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the subway. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, her voice even. "A pleasure to see you again. Cassandra." The politeness of it was more insulting than any barb. She had demoted him from a husband to a mere acquaintance. "Annalise," Grayson said, forcing a cordial tone. "Quite the little business you've built. I'm impressed." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Thank you," she replied simply before turning her attention back to the Hoffmanns. "Friedrich, you were telling me about the new Kiefer acquisition." She had dismissed him. In the heart of their world, surrounded by their people, she had effortlessly and completely dismissed him. He and Cassandra stood there for a moment suddenly, outsiders in the conversation. They were the ones left in the awkward silence. Later that night, back in their hotel suite overlooking the ocean, the facade crumbled. "This is ridiculous," Cassandra spat, unclasping her diamond bracelet and tossing it on the dresser. "Everyone was fawning over that woman, over her rocks and twigs. Helga Hoffmann looked at my bracelet like it was from a department store. It's a bubble, Cass," Grayson said, pacing the room. But he didn't believe it anymore. He had seen the look in Friedrich Hoffmann's eyes, deep respect. He had seen the genuine passion in Helga's face. Annalise wasn't selling jewelry. She was selling a new form of status, one that his money, his name couldn't easily buy. Worse, she was rewriting their history. In her narrative, he was the villain, the blind fool who cast out the princess and her magic stone. He was a footnote in her heroic rise. The thought was intolerable. The name Vanderbilt was supposed to crush others, not be a stepping stone for them. Her success is an insult to us, Cassandra continued, her voice rising. To your family. She's making a mockery of you, Grayson, and you're just letting her be. The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. He looked out at the dark ocean, his reflection a faint scowling ghost in the glass. Cassandra was right. This wasn't a game anymore. Annalise wasn't just an ex-wife with a lucky hobby. She was a rival whose very success was built on his failure of vision, on his moment of public cruelty. And a Vanderbilt does not tolerate a rival. No, he said, turning from the window, his eyes cold and hard. I'm not letting her. The irritation had now curdled into a dark, calculated resolve. It was time to remind Annalise Rosenthal what real power looked like. It was time to put the alchemist of Soho out of business. The first attack was subtle, a whisper campaign launched into the echo chamber of New York's high society. It began with Cassandra Davenport at a ladies' luncheon for the New York City Ballet. I do worry about Annalise, she'd say to a table of influential women, her brow furrowed with faux concern. She's working with such included stones. A friend in the industry told me she's essentially buying up other brands' rejects and marketing them as unique. And it's clever, I suppose, but is it honest? The poison spread. Rumors began to circulate. Annalise uses inferior quality gems. The artisanal look is just a cover for poor craftsmanship. She's a one-trick pony whose fad is about to fade. These whispers were designed to erode the most valuable asset a luxury brand has, its integrity. Annalise and Isabel Moreau saw the dip in sentiment almost immediately. A handful of tentative inquiries were quietly withdrawn. A fashion blogger with close ties to Cassandra's social circle wrote a snide post questioning the true value of Annalise pieces. This is Grayson, Annalise said, sitting across from Isabel in the Soho atelier. The city bustled below, but a chill had entered their sanctuary. This has his fingerprints all over it. He can't attack the success, so he's attacking the foundation. It's amateurish, Isabel replied, her fingers steepled, but effective in a small pond. We are not in a small pond. We ignore it. We rise above. Our work is our rebuttal. But Grayson was just warming up. When the whispers didn't work fast enough, he escalated. The second attack was a direct legal assault. Vanderbilt family lawyers sent a cease and desist letter to the Annalise headquarters. The claim was audacious trademark infringement. Grayson's legal team argued that Annalise's use of her own name, Annalise Rosenthal, was a deliberate attempt to trade on the goodwill and public recognition she had gained while married to a Vanderbilt. They demanded she rebrand her company. It was a ludicrous claim designed not to win in court, but to bleed her dry. A prolonged legal battle against a firm like Sullivan and Cromwell could bankrupt a young company, consuming time, resources, and morale. He's trying to bury us in paperwork, Isabel fumed after a conference call with their own lawyers. He knows he'll lose, but he'll make the process so painful that we'll be forced to settle or fold. Annalise, however, felt a strange surge of adrenaline. This was not a subtle whisper. This was an open declaration of war. Fine, she said, her voice steely. Let's fight. But we don't just fight in the courtroom. We fight in the press. Isabel's eyes lit up. A counter-offensive. They leaked the cease and desist letter to a sympathetic reporter at the New York Times. The resulting article was a bombshell. Vanderbilt heir attempts to strip ex-wife of her own name. The narrative was irresistible, the powerful old-money patriarch trying to bully his self-made ex-wife. The story painted Grayson as petty and vindictive, and Annalise as a David fighting a corporate Goliath. Public opinion, especially among the professional women who formed her client base, swung decisively in her favor. Sales surged. The lawsuit became a marketing gift. Grayson was enraged. His attempt to exert power had backfired spectacularly, making him look both weak and cruel. He was chastised by his own father, Grayson Vanderbilt III, a man who valued discretion above all else. "You made a public circus, son," the old man had rasped over the phone. "You took a private matter and aired it on the front page. Handle it. Quietly." Humiliated and furious, Grayson decided to hit Annalise where she was most vulnerable, her supply chain. This was his world, the world of backroom deals, leverage, and corporate hardball. Through his family's network, he learned the names of the small independent mines and cutters Annalise cherished. The family that supplied her unheated lavender spinels from Burma. The Brazilian cooperative that sourced her unique storm-tossed tourmalines. He dispatched agents from the Vanderbilt global conglomerate. They didn't threaten. They made offers that were impossible to refuse. To the Burmese family, they offered to buy their entire output for the next 5 years at double the price Annalise was paying, with a guaranteed distribution deal through a Vanderbilt subsidiary. To the Brazilian co-op, they offered funding for new modern equipment that would quadruple their yield in exchange for an exclusive contract. One by one, Annalise's lifelines were severed. She would call her contacts the people with whom she had built personal relationships, only to be met with apologetic, pained refusals. "Annalise, I'm sorry. The offer was too good for my family to refuse. We had to think of our future. You understand?" This blow was far more painful than the lawsuit. It was personal. Grayson wasn't just disrupting her business. He was colonizing her world, poisoning the very wells from which she drew her inspiration. The final, most crushing blow came from Antwerp. A venerable stone-cutting family, the Da Silvas, who had been instrumental in faceting her most unusual gems, sent her a formal letter terminating their relationship. They had signed an exclusive agreement with a newly formed luxury division of Vanderbilt Holdings. Annalise sat in her workshop, the letter in her hand, surrounded by sketches for a collection she could no longer produce. Her wellspring had run dry. The unique stones that were the soul of her brand were now being funneled directly into her enemy's hands. "He's not just trying to stop me," she said to Arthur Chadwick, who had come to sit with her amidst the crisis. "He's trying to become me." Arthur examined the letter. His old eyes, usually so kind, were now hard as flint. "He's a Vanderbilt. They don't create, they acquire. They see something of value, and they take it. But he's made a mistake. He thinks he's acquired your secret. He's bought your sources, your cutters. But he hasn't acquired your eye or your soul." And that evening, the industry trade publications announced the launch of a new high-end jewelry brand, Eterna, backed by Vanderbilt Holdings. Its creative director was Cassandra Davenport. Their debut collection, they announced, would feature a curated selection of the world's most unique and character-rich gemstones, a phrase lifted almost directly from Annalise's own press materials. Grayson had stolen her suppliers, her artisans, and her language. He was building a mimic, a hollow replica of her brand, but with the full weight of the Vanderbilt empire behind it. For the first time since leaving Park Avenue, Annalise felt a genuine stab of fear. She had built a beautiful, authentic kingdom. But a kingdom, no matter how beautiful, can still be starved into submission. The siege had begun. The launch of Eterna was as lavish as expected. Grayson spared no expense, hosting a spectacular event at the Musée Rodin in Paris. Cassandra Davenport, draped in a massive seafoam green tourmaline necklace, cut from the same rough that Annalise had coveted, played the part of visionary creative director. The jewelry was technically proficient, the stones were magnificent, but to a discerning eye, something was missing. The pieces were beautiful but soulless. They were like cover songs performed without any emotion. The designs were derivative, echoing the organic forms of Annalise, but lacking the narrative depth. It was a masterful imitation, but an imitation nonetheless. The market, however, is not always discerning. Backed by a relentless marketing budget, and the Vanderbilt name, Eterna, was an instant commercial force. They flooded magazines, sponsored events, and placed their jewelry on a new wave of influencers and actresses who were happy to take the Vanderbilt paycheck. They undercut Annalise on price, able to absorb losses that would have crippled a smaller company. Annalise's business began to feel the squeeze. Orders slowed. The buzz once hers was now shared with her corporate doppelganger. She and her team worked frantically, trying to find new sources, new stones, but Grayson's scorched earth campaign had been thorough. The niche suppliers of character-rich gems were now locked into exclusive contracts. Annalise felt cornered, the walls of her hard-won kingdom closing in. Desperation began to creep into the corners of the Soho atelier. One night, working late, she found herself staring at the framed GIA certificate for the Rosenthal chameleon, the cheap stone that had started it all. The anger and fear coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. "He's fighting a war of attrition," she said to Isabel in an emergency meeting the next day. "He thinks he can just outspend us until we die. We can't fight him on his terms. We can't win a war of resources." "So we changed the battlefield," Isabel said, her eyes glinting. "He thinks this is about jewelry. This is about... We need to find his weakness." "And what is that?" Annalise asked. "Every empire, no matter how grand, has cracks in its foundation," Isabel replied. "The Vanderbilt Empire is old, and old things can rot from within. We need to stop looking at Eterna and start looking at Vanderbilt Holdings." Isabel mobilized her own team of forensic accountants and corporate investigators, a discreet but lethal group she kept on retainer for just such occasions. For weeks they dug. They sifted through public filings, shareholder reports, and obscure trade journals, looking for leverage for a vulnerability. At first, the Vanderbilt Empire seemed impregnable, a fortress of blue-chip stocks, real estate, and diversified assets. But then they found it, a small thread. Vanderbilt Holdings had heavily invested in a portfolio of shipping and logistics companies over the past decade. On the surface, it was a nod to their family's origins, but the numbers didn't quite add up. The profits reported by these subsidiaries were unusually high and consistent, almost impossibly so, given the volatility of the global shipping market. As Isabel's team dug deeper, pulling shipping manifests and cross-referencing them with customs data, a picture began to emerge. A picture of phantom cargo, of vessels listed as full that were sailing half empty, of fuel costs being artificially inflated in reports to shareholders. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a sophisticated, long-running scheme to inflate the value of the division, securing larger and larger loans against these fraudulent assets. The Vanderbilt shipping empire, the bedrock of their modern fortune, was a house of cards. And at the center of it, the one who had overseen this aggressive expansion, was Grayson Vanderbilt IV. He had used this fraudulently inflated division as the financial leverage to launch Eterna. "He's been cooking the books for years," Isabel said, sliding a confidential report across the table to Annalise. "He used the illusion of profit from his shipping division to fund the war against you. If this gets out, he won't just be humiliated. He could face SEC investigation, shareholder lawsuits, and even criminal charges. The Vanderbilt name will be dragged through the mud for a generation." Annalise stared at the report. Here it was, a weapon of mass destruction. She could leak it. She could destroy Grayson, his career, his family's reputation. She could obliterate Eterna and everything he had built. The thought brought a grim, satisfying sense of justice. It was an eye for an eye. But as she sat with the power to ruin him, a conversation she'd had with Arthur Chadwick echoed in her mind. He had come to her, his face grim, when he first heard of the Vanderbilt counteroffensive. "There's something you should know about the Vanderbilts, Annalise," he'd said, his voice heavy. "About Grayson's father. 40 years ago, I had a partner. We weren't just Chadwick and Sons, we were Chadwick and Bell." We had discovered a small but promising deposit of demantoid garnets in Namibia. It was to be our legacy. Grayson Vanderbilt III caught wind of it. He didn't make an offer. He used his financial power to squeeze our partners, fabricate a legal dispute over the mining rights, and bled us dry in court. He drove my partner, a good man, to bankruptcy and an early grave. He took our discovery, our legacy, for pennies on the dollar and sold it to a Russian conglomerate a year later. I lost everything but this small shop. Annalise had stared at him, stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because my story was one of revenge," Arthur said, his gaze unflinching. "And I didn't want you to be driven by that. I wanted you to be driven by creation. But now you see, the son is just like the father. They are takers. They see beauty, and they consume it. They cannot build it themselves." The revelation recontextualized everything. Arthur's mentorship wasn't just kindness. It was a quiet 40-year-old quest for justice. He had seen in her a chance to foster the creation that had been stolen from him. Looking at the damning report in her hands, Annalise understood the choice before her. She could leak it and become a destroyer, just like the Vanderbilts. Or she could use the information in a different way. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything, including the one who wielded it. She hadn't built her empire to burn someone else's down. She had built it to last. "We're not going to leak it," she said to Isabel, a steely calm settling over her. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "Annalise, this is a kill shot." "I know," Annalise replied, "but if we leak it, it becomes a chaotic public scandal. The SEC gets involved, the business gets tied up in litigation for years. It's messy, and it makes us look vindictive. There's a cleaner way, a more elegant way. He used financial power to try and crush me. I'm going to use financial precision to cripple him." She picked up her phone and dialed her corporate lawyer. "I have a new acquisition target in mind," she said. "It's a mid-sized logistics and customs brokerage firm based in Rotterdam. They're called Viridian Global. I want you to begin the process immediately, and I want it to be quiet." Isabel Moreau stared at her, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face as she understood Annalise's plan. It was brilliant. It wasn't a loud, messy explosion. It was a silent, perfectly executed checkmate. Annalise's counteroffensive was not a frontal assault. It was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge. She didn't attack Eterna. She attacked its foundation. Working through a series of shell corporations set up by Isabel Moreau, she quietly acquired Viridian Global, a critical logistics firm controlling much of the operations at the port of Rotterdam. The day the deal closed, Viridian's new management issued a simple directive. All cargo from all clients was now subject to mandatory physical inspection. The effect on the Vanderbilt shipping division was immediate and catastrophic. The first of Grayson's ships to arrive was impounded when its manifest claiming high-value electronics was found to be a cover for a half-empty vessel filled with scrap metal. Within a week, his European shipping operations were paralyzed, his phantom profits replaced by real-world fines. As his credit lines froze and his father's fury rained down on him, Grayson scrambled to find the invisible force strangling his business. The answer arrived in 2 emails. The first contained a meticulously detailed report on 7 years of his financial fraud. The second contained a time and an address. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Soho Atelier. When Grayson walked into the light-filled sanctuary of the Annalise headquarters, he was a defeated man. Annalise stood waiting for him, the picture of calm control. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "My terms are not negotiable," she stated, her voice even and cool. "First, Eterna will be dissolved. You will transfer all its assets, including the inventory of stones you stole to me. You will pay all penalties. Second, Vanderbilt Holdings will make a substantial anonymous donation to a foundation I am establishing to support independent female designers. You will fund the very artists you sought to crush." She paused, letting the words land. "Finally, you will stay out of my world. If you ever interfere with my life or business again, this fraud report goes directly to the US attorney. Is that understood?" Defeated Grayson could only nod. He turned and walked out, a king dethroned in the quiet of his rival's palace. Months later at the Met Gala, where her humiliation had begun, Annalise stood as a co-chair of the event. She wore a simple gown, her only adornment, a new masterpiece of her own design, with the Rosenthal chameleon floating at its center, its sunset fire captivating all who saw it. Across the room, she briefly saw Grayson, a solitary figure on the fringe of a world that was no longer his. Their eyes met for a second. There was no triumph in her gaze, only the quiet finality of a war won. She had built her empire not on revenge, but on a foundation of undeniable worth. Annalise's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was a powerful testament to resilience, vision, and the radical act of defining your own worth when the world tells you that you have none. She transformed a moment of profound public humiliation into the cornerstone of a legacy, proving that true value isn't dictated by brand names or price tags, but by passion, authenticity, and an unwavering belief in oneself. Her story reminds us that the things others dismiss as cheap or flawed can often hold the most incredible world-changing potential. It's a lesson in looking closer, seeing the magic that others miss, and having the courage to build a kingdom from the stones they throw at you. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate checkmate? Was it more powerful than simply exposing him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were inspired by her incredible story of transformation, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of incredible triumphs. He thought the greatest day of his life was the day she left. He saw her a year later, a ghost from his past, dressed in what he called pathetic simple clothes. He laughed standing beside his glamorous fiancée, a woman draped in a one-of-a-kind designer gown that screamed wealth and success. But what he didn't know, what the whole world was about to find out, was that the woman he was mocking, his insignificant ex-wife Evelyn, hadn't just admired that dress. She had sketched it, stitched it, and created it. This is the story of how a man's cruel mockery became the spotlight for his own public humiliation. The air in the Corinthian ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Foundation, a night where New York's elite gathered to outbid, outdress, and outshine one another under the guise of philanthropy. Arthur Penhaligon navigated the glittering crowd with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was born to be in such rooms. On his arm, a perfect accessory to his tailored Tom Ford suit, was Bethany Cole, his fiancée. Her laughter was like the chime of tiny expensive bells, and her presence turned heads, mostly because of the dress. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light of the chandeliers. It fell in a column, simple in its silhouette, but breathtakingly complex in its construction. A cascade of hand-stitched, gunmetal grey beadwork traced the line of her collarbone and wrapped around one shoulder, resembling a delicate frozen branch of a winter tree. It was elegant, exclusive, and whispered a price tag that would make most people gasp. Arthur was preening. Every admiring glance at Bethany was a victory for him. It was validation. He had traded up. He had won. And then he saw her. Across the room, near a less populated bar, stood Evelyn Reed, his ex-wife. It took him a moment to be sure. She looked different, smaller somehow. She was dressed in a simple charcoal grey sheath dress made of a soft matty fabric. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell just below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a neat low ponytail, and her face was almost bare of makeup. Beside the shimmering peacocking crowd, she looked like a sparrow in a flock of birds of paradise. A nasty, triumphant smile curled Arthur's lip. "Well, well," he murmured to Bethany, his voice a low thrum of condescension. "Look what the cat dragged in." Bethany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted brows furrowing slightly. "Who is that, Evelyn?" My ex-Arthur said the word ex, laced with a satisfaction that was almost palpable. "Can you believe it? I haven't seen her since the divorce. Looks like life hasn't been too kind." He decided to approach her. It was a power move, a public demonstration of his new improved life. Bethany, sensing the drama, clung to his arm, a silent co-conspirator. Evelyn was speaking to the bartender when Arthur's shadow fell over her. "Evelyn," he said, his voice offensively smooth. She turned, and her eyes, a calm, clear grey, met his. There was a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly masked by a polite, neutral expression. "Arthur," she acknowledged, her voice even. She glanced at the woman on his arm. "I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Bethany Cole," Arthur announced, practically puffing out his chest. "Bethany, this is Evelyn Reed." "A pleasure," Bethany said, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive scan of Evelyn's simple attire. The judgment was clear. "You too?" Evelyn replied, her gaze briefly falling on the midnight blue dress. A strange, unreadable emotion passed through her eyes before she met Bethany's gaze again. "That's a stunning gown." Bethany brightened instantly. "Oh, thank you. It's a custom piece from a new designer, Aura. Have you heard of them?" "Probably not. They're incredibly exclusive. It took my father's connections just to get a consultation." Arthur chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "I don't think Aura is on Evelyn's radar, darling. She always did favor minimalism." He gestured vaguely at her charcoal dress. "Still keeping it simple, I see. Very practical." The insult was designed to sting, to remind her of every time he had criticized her for not being flashy enough, for preferring quality and comfort over loud brand names. During their marriage, he had constantly tried to mold her into a society wife. Buying her clothes, she hated pushing her into circles where she felt like an imposter. Her refusal, her quiet insistence on being herself, had been a major point of contention. Evelyn's composure didn't crack. She simply offered a small, tight smile. "Practicality has its merits, Arthur. It lasts. So do investments." Arthur shot back pointedly, adjusting the cufflink that peeked from his sleeve. "And I've always believed in investing in the best. Bethany looks like a queen, don't you think? She looks beautiful." Evelyn agreed, her voice still unnervingly calm. The lack of a wounded reaction was starting to irritate Arthur. He wanted to see a flash of envy, a hint of regret. He saw nothing. It was like talking to a placid lake. "Well, we should be getting back to our table," he said, his tone dismissive. "It was interesting seeing you, Evelyn. Try to enjoy the canapés." With a final triumphant smirk, he steered Bethany away, leaving Evelyn standing alone at the bar. "My God, she was dreary," Bethany whispered once they were out of earshot. "That dress looked like something my grandmother would wear to a funeral." "You were married to that, a youthful mistake," Arthur said, waving a hand as if to erase the memory. "She had no ambition, no understanding of how the world works. It's all about presentation, darling. Always has been. The life I have with you, this," he squeezed her arm, "this is the life I was meant for." He glanced back across the ballroom. Evelyn was no longer at the bar. She had vanished back into the sea of anonymous faces, a plain, grey stone swallowed by a glittering tide. He felt a surge of pride. He had shown her exactly what she had lost. He had stood before her, a titan of success, with a goddess on his arm, while she looked like a forgotten relic. He was completely, blissfully, and catastrophically unaware that the foundation of his entire triumphant moment, the very dress that symbolized his victory, was an intricate lie that was about to unravel his entire world. The Corinthian ballroom's opulence felt a world away from the quiet, ordered sanctuary of Evelyn's studio. Located on the third floor of a pre-war building in a district known more for its artisan bakeries than its high-fashion boutiques, the space was her haven. It was one large room with soaring ceilings and massive paned windows that flooded the space with the soft grey light of the city. One wall was covered in corkboard, a chaotic but meticulous collage of fabric swatches, charcoal sketches, and anatomical drawings of the human form in motion. Mannequins stood like silent sentinels, some bare others draped in muslin prototypes. Bolts of exquisite fabric, cashmere silk, charmeuse, and heavy wool crepe were stacked neatly on industrial shelving. The only sound was the gentle hum of her professional-grade sewing machine and the quiet scratch of a pencil against thick paper. Evelyn sat at her large drafting table, her back straight, the charcoal dress she'd worn to the gala still on. She wasn't designing, she was simply holding a pencil, staring at a blank sheet. The encounter with Arthur hadn't broken her, but it had left a deep, familiar ache. His words echoed in her mind, still keeping it simple, very practical. He had always used the word simple like a weapon, equating it with unambitious and lacking. He couldn't comprehend that for Evelyn, simplicity was the ultimate sophistication. It was about stripping away the non-essential to reveal the perfect line, the flawless cut, the soul of the garment. It was a philosophy she had poured into her work, into her life, and into the very brand she was building. A key turned in the lock and the door opened to reveal Finn O'Connell, her business partner and fiercely loyal friend. He was a whirlwind of creative energy, with a shock of red hair that refused to be tamed, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. He took one look at her rigid posture and the untouched sketchbook and knew. So he said, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table, "You saw him." Evelyn finally looked up, her grey eyes clouded. And his fiancée, Bethany Cole. Ah, the Cole heiress. Of coal, mining and minerals. Of course, Finn said, his tone dripping with disdain. He leaned against the table. Let me guess, he was a complete ass. A small, wry smile touched Evelyn's lips. He hasn't changed. He mocked my dress. Finn glanced at her charcoal sheath. The Clara, one of our best sellers from the ready-to-wear line. The one that sold out in 3 days on Net-a-Porter. That dress, the very same, Evelyn confirmed. He called it practical. Finn snorted. The man wouldn't know good design if it bit him on his perfectly tailored backside. What about the fiancée? What was she wearing? This was the question Evelyn had been dreading and anticipating. She took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth a small comfort. She was wearing the Celeste. Finn froze his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He stared at her. The Celeste Wambig gown was not part of their ready-to-wear collection. It was a couture piece, a one-of-a-kind commission. It was the dress with the midnight silk and the hand-beaded gunmetal branch. It was to date the most ambitious, expensive and difficult piece their small atelier had ever produced. No, Finn whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. You're kidding me. She was wearing the dress. The very same, Evelyn repeated, a hint of the night's strange irony finally bubbling to the surface. She was very proud of it. Told me it was by an exclusive new designer called Aura. Finn threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, joyous sound that filled the quiet studio, chasing away the lingering ghosts of the ballroom. Oh, that is rich. That is poetic justice of the highest order. The man who mocked your clothes is paying a fortune to drape his new toy in them. He has no idea, does he? None whatsoever. Evelyn said, the tightness in her chest finally beginning to loosen. Aura was her creation, born from the ashes of her marriage. When she and Arthur divorced, she had taken her settlement, a sum he'd considered a paltry but fair price to be rid of her, and poured every cent into this studio. She had made a conscious decision to separate her name, Evelyn Reed, from her work. Her name was tainted by its association with him, by the society pages that had painted her as his dowdy, uninteresting wife. She wanted her designs to stand on their own, and so Aura was born. It was anonymous, mysterious. There was no face to the brand, only a philosophy, understated, luxury, impeccable craftsmanship, and timeless design. Finn handled the business and marketing masterfully, building a cult following based on whispers and exclusivity. They started with a small, ready-to-wear collection, sold through a few high-end online retailers. The pieces, like the Clara dress Evelyn wore, were praised for their quality and cut. The couture line was a new, more ambitious venture. They took on only a handful of commissions, vetted through a discreet agent. The client never met the designer. All communication went through the agent, ensuring Evelyn's anonymity. The Celeste gown for Bethany Cole had been their biggest commission yet. Evelyn had spent over 200 hours on the beadwork alone, her fingers raw, her eyes strained, pouring her pain, her resilience, and her artistry into every tiny stitch. The dress was a piece of her soul. "And you didn't say a word?" Finn asked, his eyes dancing. Oh, to have been a fly on that wall. You just stood there and let him mock the Clara while his fiancée was wearing your masterpiece. What was I to say? Evelyn asked, her voice quiet. Arthur, you colossal fool. You just paid a down payment on a condominium for the dress your fiancée is wearing. And it was made by me, the woman you called worthless. Yes, that's exactly what you should have said, Finn exclaimed. I would have paid to see his face. No, Evelyn said, shaking her head. That's his game. Public scenes, grand gestures, humiliation. My success has nothing to do with him. Aura's success is about the work. It has to remain that way. Finn's expression softened. He understood. This wasn't about revenge for Evelyn, not in the way Arthur would understand it. This was about reclamation. It was about proving to herself that the part of her Arthur had tried to extinguish her creativity, her quiet strength, was actually her greatest asset. Okay, boss, he said gently, but you have to admit there's a certain delicious irony to it all. The irony is not lost on me, she admitted, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She looked around her studio at the tools of her trade, the evidence of her hard work. This was her world, not the Corinthian ballroom, not Arthur Penhaligon's sphere of influence. She had spent years feeling small in his shadow. That night, for the first time, she realized she wasn't in his shadow at all. She was in her own light, a light so bright he couldn't even see it. He just saw a simple grey dress, while unknowingly basking in the glow of her true brilliant work. The game had changed, and Arthur didn't even know he was a player. In the weeks following the fundraiser, the name Aura became something of a mantra in the Penhaligon Cole household, or rather in the sleek, minimalist penthouse apartment Arthur had purchased in anticipation of his new life with Bethany. Bethany was obsessed. They say she's a total recluse, she said one evening, scrolling feverishly through a fashion blog on her tablet. She was lounging on a vast white sofa that had cost more than Evelyn's first car. The designer. No one has ever seen her. Some people think Aura is a collective of European artisans. Others say it's the secret side project of a famous, established designer who wants to be more experimental. Arthur grunted from behind his laptop. He was reviewing market analytics. His brow furrowed in concentration. A major energy stock he'd bet heavily on had taken a sudden sharp downturn, and it was making him nervous. As long as they keep making dresses that make you look good. Who cares, he said, not looking up. I care, Bethany retorted, tossing the tablet onto the cushion beside her. It's about more than the dress, Arthur. It's about the story, the mystery. Genevieve Dubois just mentioned them in her latest column. She called Aura the most exciting new voice in couture. The name Genevieve Dubois made Arthur pause. Dubois was the editor-in-chief of Elan, the undisputed Bible of the fashion world. Her word could make or break a brand overnight. If she was praising Aura, then Bethany's dress wasn't just a dress. It was a cultural artifact. Good, he said, trying to sound pleased. That means your investment paid off. I want another one, Bethany declared. Arthur finally looked up from his screen. Another one, Bethany. That dress cost a fortune. And it was worth every penny. I want Aura to design my wedding dress. Arthur's jaw tightened. The wedding was 6 months away, a lavish affair at her family's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. It was more than a wedding. It was a merger, the union of Penhaligon ambition and Cole old money. He was counting on the financial stability this marriage would bring him, especially now with his portfolio looking increasingly volatile. He needed to keep Bethany happy, but a custom Aura wedding gown, the cost would be astronomical. Darling, that's a wonderful idea, he said, forcing a smile. But you said yourself how hard it was to get the first one. Are you sure they even do wedding gowns? I've already had my father's assistant reach out to the agent. Bethany said, her tone triumphant. They're considering it. They want a design proposal and a full creative brief. They're playing hard to get, which only makes me want it more. Arthur felt a prickle of annoyance. He was a man who moved markets, who commanded respect. The idea of having to court some mysterious, faceless designer for the privilege of giving them an obscene amount of money was galling. It flew in the face of his entire worldview, where money and status were the keys that opened every door. It's just a dress, Bethany? He said, his patience wearing thin. No, it's the dress, she shot back, her voice rising. Don't you get it? This is our wedding. Genevieve Dubois will be there. Everyone will be there. I want to be wearing Aura. It says that we're on the inside, that we're ahead of the curve. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He saw the logic in her argument. The wedding was a performance, and they needed the right costumes. An Aura gown would be a statement. It would cement their status as the city's new power couple. It was an investment in their brand. All right, he conceded. All right, see what their agent says. He returned to his laptop, but his concentration was broken. He thought back to the night of the gala, to Evelyn in her drab little dress. The contrast between her and Bethany had been so satisfying. Evelyn represented his past, quiet, unassuming, and in his mind utterly devoid of the hunger required to succeed. Bethany was his future, bright, bold, and draped in the very definition of success. Yet there was a nagging dissonance. Evelyn's calmness at the gala had been unsettling. She should have been devastated. She should have looked up at him with longing and regret. Instead, she had looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. It was absurd. What could she possibly have to pity him for? His phone buzzed. It was a market alert. The energy stock had dropped another 4%. A knot of cold dread tightened in his stomach. He was more exposed on this position than he'd let on to anyone, even Bethany. He had leveraged other assets to increase his stake, sure of a quick and massive return. It had been a gamble, a move to secure the kind of wealth that would finally place him beyond the reach of the old money snobbery of families like the Coles. Now that gamble was threatening to blow up in his face. He looked over at Bethany, who was once again lost in her tablet, happily pinning ideas for her Aura-designed wedding. Her family's fortune was the safety net he was counting on. The wedding couldn't just happen. It had to be perfect. Her happiness was paramount. Suddenly, the Aura dress wasn't just a frivolous expense anymore. It was a critical component of the plan. It was the price of keeping the dream alive. Find out what they need, he said, his voice harder than before. Whatever the cost, whatever they want, get it done. Bethany looked up, a radiant smile on her face. I knew you'd understand. He didn't understand. Not really. He didn't understand the obsession, the mystery, or the power this invisible designer held. He just understood that in his world, which was beginning to show faint but terrifying cracks, appearances were everything. And the appearance of success, symbolized by a dress from a designer named Aura, was something he desperately needed to maintain. The name Aura began to spread through the elite circles of New York like a secret language. It was a whisper at cocktail parties, a name drop in the front rows of Fashion Week, a tag on the most exclusive social media accounts. The mystery surrounding the designer only fueled the brand's meteoric rise. Aura wasn't just fashion, it was a phenomenon. Finn was a master at stoking the flames. He orchestrated a series of calculated leaks and placements. A renowned actress was photographed at LAX wearing an Aura cashmere travel set, looking effortlessly chic. A French heiress was spotted in St. Bart's in a deceptively simple Aura linen sundress. Each piece was instantly recognizable by its cut and quality, yet devoid of any logo. The lack of branding became the brand. Then came the feature in Elan. Genevieve Dubois dedicated a full 2 pages to Aura, not with flashy photographs, but with elegant prose and artistic sketches of the designs. The article titled "The Architecture of Silence" was a love letter to the brand's philosophy. In an age of deafening logos and celebrity-driven spectacle, Dubois wrote, "Aura is a radical act of quiet confidence." The anonymous designer, rumored to be a single fiercely private artisan, is not selling a name but a feeling. The garments are an intimate conversation between fabric and form. To wear Aura is not to scream, "Look at me," but to command attention with the sheer force of impeccable construction and understated grace. This is not fashion for the masses. It is armor for the discerning, a secret shared among those who understand that true luxury doesn't need to shout. Evelyn kept a copy of the magazine open on her desk. She had read the article a dozen times, each time feeling a thrill that was entirely her own. Armor for the discerning. Dubois understood. She understood what Evelyn was trying to do. The success was both exhilarating and terrifying. The demand was exploding. Finn was fielding calls from major department stores, from stylists, from investors, wanting to buy a piece of the mystery. "We're at a crossroads," Finn said one afternoon, pacing the studio floor. "We can't stay a two-person operation forever. The ready-to-wear line needs to scale up or we'll be crushed by the demand. And the couture requests are insane." The crown princess of a minor European nation wants a gown for the royal wedding. Evelyn felt a wave of vertigo. A princess. It was all happening so fast. "We're not ready for that kind of expansion, Finn. The quality is everything. If we scale up too quickly, we lose what makes Aura special." "I know," he said, stopping to look at her. "Which is why we need to be strategic. I've found a small family-owned atelier in Italy that can handle a larger production run of the ready-to-wear line. The quality is superb. It would free you up to focus purely on the couture and the core design." It was a sensible solution, but Evelyn hesitated. It meant letting go, trusting others with her vision. It was another step out of the shadows and into a much larger world. Meanwhile, Arthur Penhaligon was also reading Genevieve Dubois' article. He'd found it on Bethany's nightstand. He read the words, "Quiet confidence, understated. Grace doesn't need to shout," and felt a strange sense of cognitive dissonance. They were concepts he associated with weakness, with his ex-wife. How could they possibly be the description of the world's most coveted luxury brand? It didn't compute. To him, luxury was a megaphone. It was a Bugatti, a Patek Philippe, a front row seat. It was loud, but the world, at least this influential corner of it, was telling him he was wrong. "Did you see Bethany?" asked, coming into the room, wrapped in a silk robe. "She called us the discerning." She had completely co-opted the brand's identity as her own. In her mind, by wearing Aura, she was Aura. "I saw," Arthur said, closing the magazine. "Their agent has been in touch, by the way." Bethany squealed with delight. "And what did they say about the wedding dress?" Arthur felt a familiar pang of annoyance at having to report the news. "They're particular. They've agreed to consider the commission. But they have terms." "Terms? What terms?" "First, a non-refundable design deposit of $50,000, just to create the initial sketches." Bethany didn't even blink. To her, it was a rounding error. To Arthur, whose finances were becoming more precarious by the day, it was a gut punch. "Second," he continued, his voice tight, "the designer Aura insists on a private meeting with the bride, alone, to understand her essence before beginning the design process." "A meeting?" Bethany gasped. "A real meeting?" "With Aura." "Oh my God, Arthur. No one gets to meet Aura." "I'll be the first. What will I wear? What will I say?" She was already spiraling into a vortex of excited preparation. Arthur, however, was stuck on the absurdity of the situation. This phantom designer was now dictating terms to him, summoning his fiancée like a queen summoning a courtier. The meeting is to be held at the designer's private atelier, he added, reading from the agent's email on his phone. No photographs, no companions, and the location will only be disclosed 24 hours in advance. A non-disclosure agreement is required. It's all so mysterious, so chic. Bethany swooned. This is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Arthur watched her, a cold feeling creeping up his spine. The world was changing, and the rules he had always played by seemed to be shifting under his feet. Power, he was discovering, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it was a mysterious, unseen woman who could command a $50,000 deposit for a sketch and summon the city's most sought-after heiress to a secret meeting. He hated it. He hated the feeling of not being in control. But he was trapped. He needed the Cole family money, and the price of that was Bethany's happiness, and the price of her happiness was now inextricably linked to this ghost named Aura. Unbeknownst to him, in a quiet studio across town, the ghost was preparing for the meeting. Evelyn stood before a mannequin draped in ivory silk. She was sketching not a wedding dress, but a plan for a conversation. She felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't nervous about meeting the woman who had replaced her. She was curious. This wasn't about revenge. It was about research. Bethany Cole was the embodiment of the world Arthur had wanted Evelyn to be a part of. To design the ultimate dress for her, Evelyn needed to understand that world, not as an outsider, but from the inside. She needed to understand the woman Arthur had chosen. She needed to understand what he valued. And in doing so, perhaps she could finally fully understand why he had never valued her. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in a shroud of secrecy that Bethany found thrilling and Arthur found deeply irritating. A black car dispatched by the Aura agent arrived at their penthouse precisely at 2 o'clock. Bethany, having spent the entire morning agonizing over her outfit, finally settled on a Dior pantsuit, powerful but respectful, and emerged looking like she was about to negotiate a corporate merger. "I can't believe you're not allowed to come," she said to Arthur, for the 10th time adjusting the collar of her jacket. "Just remember what we talked about," Arthur said, his tone that of a coach sending a player into the big game. "Be charming, emphasize the prestige of the wedding, the guest list. Make sure this Aura person understands that this isn't just any commission. It's a career-making opportunity." Bethany rolled her eyes. "I think Aura is already doing just fine, Arthur. Try not to worry. I'll be back in a few hours, hopefully, with a wedding dress in the works." She kissed him on the cheek and swept out of the apartment. Arthur watched from the window as the black car pulled away, a small, dark vessel disappearing into the city's vast circulatory system. He felt completely powerless, a feeling he utterly despised. He paced the length of his living room, the polished floor reflecting his agitated form. To distract himself, he decided to do what he did best: investigate. He opened his laptop and typed Aura Designer Atelier location into the search bar. The results were, as expected, fruitless. Message boards were filled with speculation, but there was no concrete information. The brand's digital footprint was a masterclass in controlled anonymity. Frustrated, he called a man he knew named Patrick, a private investigator he occasionally used for discreet corporate due diligence. Patrick was expensive, but he was good. "Patrick," Arthur said, his voice clipped, "I have a small personal project for you. It's time sensitive." "Name it," came the gruff reply. "A fashion brand. Aura. I want to know who is behind it. I want a name, an address, a history, everything. Aura." Patrick sounded surprised. "That's a tough one, Mr. Penhaligon. They're famously airtight." "Everyone has a weakness," Arthur snapped. "Follow the money. The corporate filings. The agent they use. The car service they hired today. I want an answer by the end of the day." "It'll cost you," Patrick warned. Just get it done, Arthur said, and hung up. Meanwhile, Bethany's car was weaving its way out of the familiar territory of Midtown and into a neighborhood she rarely, if ever, ventured into. The skyscrapers gave way to older, more uniform buildings of brick and stone. The storefronts changed from global luxury brands to independent bookstores and small artisanal shops. The car finally stopped in front of an unassuming grey stone building with a discreet black-painted door. There was no sign, no plaque. A woman in a simple, elegant black dress was waiting. "Miss Cole," she asked politely. "This way, please." Bethany was led through the door and up 3 flights of stairs. The air grew quieter with each step. The woman opened a final door and gestured for Bethany to enter. "Aura will be with you shortly." Bethany stepped inside and the door closed softly behind her, leaving her alone. The room was breathtaking. It was not the opulent, velvet-draped salon she had imagined. It was a working studio, vast, airy, and filled with light. Bolts of fabric were stacked like a library of textures. Sketches were pinned to a wall. Mannequins stood in thoughtful poses. The room smelled of clean linen charcoal and something floral like jasmine tea. It felt sacred. She wandered deeper into the room, running her hand over a bolt of heavy silk. The quality was undeniable. She saw a dress in progress on one of the mannequins, a column of deep emerald green, its seams pinned with surgical precision. This was a place of serious work. "Miss Cole, thank you for coming." The voice was quiet, calm, and came from behind her. Bethany turned. Standing there was a woman. She was dressed simply in tailored black trousers and a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was intelligent and serene. She looked familiar, but Bethany couldn't place her. There was an air of quiet authority about her, but she wasn't what Bethany had expected at all. She had pictured some flamboyant, eccentric artist. This woman was composed. "You're Aura?" Bethany asked, a little thrown. "I am the designer behind Aura," the woman said with a small, polite smile. She did not offer her name. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you some tea?" They sat in 2 simple but elegant armchairs near the large windows. The woman Aura poured tea into delicate ceramic cups. She moved with an unhurried grace that Bethany found both calming and slightly intimidating. "Your celestial magic gown was a pleasure to create." Aura began, her voice smooth and even. The beadwork was inspired by the hoarfrost on winter branches. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," Bethany said, meaning it sincerely. Everyone was captivated by it. "Good design shouldn't captivate," Aura corrected gently. "It should liberate. It should feel like the purest version of yourself." She looked at Bethany with discerning eyes. "Tell me about the wedding, not the venue or the guest list. Tell me how you want to feel on that day." The question caught Bethany off guard. No other designer had ever asked her that. They asked about silhouettes, necklines, fabrics. They asked about trends. Arthur had told her to talk about status, about making a statement. But this quiet, intense woman was asking about her feelings. For the next hour they talked, or rather Bethany talked. Prodded by Aura's insightful, gentle questions, she found herself speaking not just about the wedding, but about her life. She spoke of the pressure of being a Cole, the constant expectation to be perfect, to be dazzling. She admitted that sometimes the galas and the parties felt like a performance, and that she wasn't always sure who she was when the costume came off. She had never spoken this way to anyone, least of all to Arthur. The designer listened patiently, her grey eyes watchful and intelligent. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were perceptive, cutting through the noise to the heart of the matter. "It seems to me," Aura said finally, as the light outside began to fade, "that you are caught between wanting to be a monument and wanting to be a woman. The world expects you to be a monument. Your dress should allow you to be a woman." Bethany stared at her, mesmerized. "Yes," she whispered. "That's it. That's exactly it. As she was leaving, feeling lighter and more understood than she had in years, a thought struck her. The designer's face was still naggingly familiar. "Have we met before?" Bethany asked at the door. Aura's calm expression didn't waver. "I'm not a very social person. I doubt our paths would have crossed." The answer was smooth, definitive. Bethany let it go. Back in the penthouse, Arthur was pacing like a caged tiger. His phone finally rang. It was Patrick. "You're not going to believe this," the investigator said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "Aura is registered as a sole proprietorship. I had to pull property deeds and utility records for the atelier address the car service dropped at. The owner of the brand, the sole designer, the woman who owns that studio, her name is Evelyn Reed." Arthur froze. The world tilted on its axis. "What did you say, Evelyn Reed? As in your ex-wife?" Arthur sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. Evelyn, Evelyn dreary, simple, practical Evelyn. The woman he had mocked, pitied, and discarded. It was impossible. It was a joke, a mistake. But as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed, he knew it was true. Her hobby, her quiet nature, her strange, placid reaction at the gala. Her comment, "Practicality has its merits. It lasts." And the dress, the Celeste gown, his symbol of triumph, of trading up. He had paid his ex-wife, the woman he considered a failure, a small fortune to make his new fiancée look like a queen. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. Just then, the door opened. Bethany swept in, her face glowing. "Arthur, it was incredible. She's a genius, an absolute genius. You should have heard the things she said. She gets it. She gets me," she gushed. Arthur looked at her, at the woman he was pinning all his hopes on, and all he could see was the ghost of his wife. He had sent Bethany into the lion's den, and she had come back calling the lion a visionary. "She's going to design the dress," Bethany announced, beaming. "And Arthur, I think it's going to be the most beautiful dress in the world." Arthur couldn't speak. He just stared, his mind a maelstrom of rage, shock, and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. The weeks leading up to the Metropolitan Fashion Vanguard Awards were a blur of activity for everyone involved, though for vastly different reasons. For Evelyn, it was a period of intense, focused creation. After her meeting with Bethany, she had designed a wedding dress that was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. It was not the monumental, attention-grabbing gown Bethany thought she wanted. Instead, it was a study in vulnerability and strength, made of a heavy liquid silk crepe that moved like water. It had long, clean lines, a dramatic sweeping back, and sleeves so delicately embroidered with tiny seed pearl blossoms that they seemed to have grown there. It was a dress for a woman, not an heiress. Bethany had wept when she saw the sketches. But beyond the wedding dress, bigger news was brewing. Genevieve Dubois, having championed Aura from the beginning, had used her considerable influence. Aura was to be presented with the Emerging Designer of the Year award at the upcoming Vanguard ceremony, the most prestigious event on the fashion calendar. The one condition of accepting the award was that the designer behind Aura would finally have to reveal their identity. Finn had argued for it passionately. "This is it, Ev. This is the moment. You can't stay a ghost forever. You've built the foundation. The work speaks for itself. Now it's time to claim it. It's time for Evelyn Reed to take a bow." Evelyn, after much soul-searching, agreed. It was time. Her anonymity had served its purpose. It had protected her, allowed her to build her business on merit alone. Now, stepping into the light felt less like a risk and more like a final necessary step in her own liberation. For Arthur, those same weeks were a private hell. The knowledge that Evelyn was Aura festered inside him like a poison. Every excited mention of the brand from Bethany, every gushing compliment about the mysterious designer's genius was a fresh twist of the knife. He was trapped in a farce of his own making. His fiancée was idolizing his ex-wife, and he was footing the bill. His financial situation had also worsened. The energy stock had collapsed, wiping out a significant portion of his capital. He was now more dependent than ever on his marriage to Bethany. He couldn't afford to rock the boat. He couldn't expose Evelyn without exposing his own foolishness, without destroying Bethany's happiness, and with it his own financial salvation. So he said nothing. He smiled, he nodded, he played the part of the proud, supportive fiancé, while inside he was consumed by a helpless rage. He tried to subtly poison the well. "Are you sure about the dress, darling?" he'd ask. "It seems a bit simple in the sketches." "It's not simple, Arthur, it's sublime." Bethany would counter completely under Evelyn's spell. Aura says that true elegance is quiet. The words were Evelyn's, and hearing them from Bethany's lips was a unique form of torture. The night of the Vanguard Awards arrived. It was the social apex of the season held at the Museum of Modern Art. The red carpet was a river of flashbulbs and couture. Arthur stood stiffly beside Bethany, his smile a tight, painful rictus. Bethany was a vision. She was wearing another custom aura creation for the event, a gown of shimmering, pewter-colored silk, elegant and striking. She was once again the center of attention. "Isn't it thrilling?" she whispered to him as they took their seats in the grand auditorium. "They say Aura is going to be revealed tonight when she accepts her award. We'll finally get to see her." Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. He knew what was coming. He could have warned Bethany, could have saved her the public shock. But a dark, selfish part of him wanted her to feel the same humiliation he felt. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. The ceremony began. Awards were presented, speeches were made. Finally, Genevieve Dubois took the stage to present the award for Emerging Designer of the Year. The room fell silent. There are moments in fashion. Genevieve began, her voice resonating through the auditorium, when a new voice emerges that is so clear, so confident, and so utterly original that it changes the conversation. This year, that voice belongs to Aura. A montage of Aura's designs flashed on the giant screens. The actress at the airport, the French heiress, and finally, a stunning editorial shot of the Celeste gown. Bethany gasped and squeezed Arthur's arm. "That's my dress." "Aura has reminded us," Genevieve continued, "that craftsmanship is not old-fashioned, that silence can be more powerful than noise, and that a garment's true value lies not in its label, but in its soul." The designer built this brand from the ground up on her own terms, letting the work speak for itself. She is a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of artistry in a world obsessed with fame. Arthur felt his collar grow tight. Genevieve was telling Evelyn's story, his story, but from a very different perspective. "It is my profound honor to announce that the winner of the 2025 Emerging Designer of the Year award is Aura, and the incredible woman behind it, Ms. Evelyn Reed." The name hung in the air for a moment. There was a smattering of confused applause. Evelyn Reed. The name was unfamiliar to most. And then, from a side aisle, Evelyn emerged. She was wearing a simple, exquisitely cut black jumpsuit of her own design. Her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked poised, confident, and serene. She looked nothing like the drab, defeated woman Arthur had painted in his memory. She looked like a creator, a powerhouse. The camera projecting her image onto the screens panned for reactions in the audience. It found Bethany Cole. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the screen to the stage, and then to the man beside her face a mask of confusion. And then, the camera found Arthur. His face was pale, his expression frozen in a silent scream of utter abject horror. The two shots, the shocked fiancé and the humiliated ex-husband, were broadcast for the entire fashion world to see. Bethany turned to him, her eyes flashing with a million questions. But before she could speak, Evelyn reached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, her calm grey eyes sweeping over the room until for a brief, searing moment they met Arthur's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no malice. There was only a quiet finality. She leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Genevieve and the Vanguard Committee. They say to build something new, you first have to tear down the old. I'd like to thank my ex-husband, Arthur Penhaligon. He taught me through his own actions the profound importance of self-worth. He was the one who first showed me that judging a woman by the simplicity of her clothes is a fool's game. Because you never know. She might have designed the dress your fiancé is wearing." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. It was a perfectly delivered, devastatingly elegant coup de grace. Every eye in the room swiveled from Evelyn on the stage to Arthur and Bethany. Bethany looked down at her pewter gown as if it had caught fire. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. She stared at Arthur not with confusion anymore, but with the cold, hard light of dawning comprehension and utter betrayal. Arthur didn't see her look. He was just staring at the stage, at the woman he had so casually discarded. She hadn't just built an empire from the ashes of their marriage. She had used his own arrogance as the blueprint. And she had just unveiled her masterpiece on the biggest stage in the world, leaving him buried in the rubble. The aftermath of the Vanguard Awards was a nuclear winter for Arthur Penhaligon. The story was simply too juicy to be ignored. It had everything: a scorned wife's triumphant return, a clueless heiress, and a pompous, arrogant husband receiving his public comeuppance. The gossip columns and fashion blogs feasted on it for weeks. They called it the Aura Affair and the Penhaligon Predicament. Photos of Arthur's horrified face and Bethany's shocked expression were juxtaposed with images of Evelyn's serene, powerful acceptance speech. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, glacial affair. Bethany sat on the far side of the limousine, her arms crossed, her aura gown looking like a cruel joke. Arthur tried to speak, to formulate a defense, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? "I'm sorry I mocked my ex-wife while secretly making you her biggest patron. I'm sorry, I'm a fool." When they arrived, Bethany didn't even look at him. She walked straight to the guest bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, her father, a formidable man with cold, calculating eyes, arrived with two of his lawyers. The meeting was short and brutal. The engagement was off. All financial ties between the Coles and Arthur were severed. Mr. Cole made it icily clear that Arthur's name was now poison in their world. The wedding, the merger, the financial safety net, it all vanished in an instant, left alone in the sterile white penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum. Arthur's world fully collapsed. The loss of the Cole fortune meant his creditors, who had been patient in anticipation of his marriage, came calling. The leveraged bets on the energy stock became an anchor, pulling him down into a sea of debt. Within 3 months, he was forced to sell the penthouse, his car, and his collection of expensive watches. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by off-the-rack replacements. The Titan of finance was reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at the same parties he used to command. He saw Evelyn one last time months later. It was a chance encounter on a busy street. He was rushing to a job interview for a mid-level analyst position. She was stepping out of a black car, looking effortlessly chic in a camel-colored aura coat on her way into a building that probably housed her new expanded headquarters. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. He saw no pity, no gloating. He saw nothing at all. To her, he was just a man in a crowd, a ghost from a past she had long since moved beyond. That indifference was more painful than any hatred could ever be. Evelyn's world, in contrast, was dawning. Revealing her identity had been like throwing gasoline on the fire of her success. Aura, now attached to the compelling story of Evelyn Reed, became the most sought-after brand in the world. Investors lined up, but she chose her partners carefully, retaining full creative control. She opened a flagship store in Soho, a minimalist temple to her design philosophy. She accepted the commission from the European princess. Her brand became synonymous with intelligent, empowered luxury. She never spoke of Arthur publicly again. Her speech at the awards had been the first and last word on the matter. It wasn't a story she needed to tell. It was a foundation she had built upon. One evening, months after the awards, she was in her new larger studio working late. The space was beautiful, overlooking the city lights. Finn came in with 2 cups of tea, a ritual that had remained unchanged. "The final numbers for the quarter are in," he said, setting a cup on her desk. "We've exceeded our projections by 200%. "That's good," Evelyn said, smiling, but her eyes were on a sketch in front of her. "Just good," Finn teased, leaning against the desk. "Ev, we're building an empire." She looked up at him, her grey eyes clear and bright. "We're building beautiful things, Finn. That's what matters." She took a sip of her tea. "The empire is just a happy consequence." He watched her for a moment, the woman he had seen at her lowest, now so firmly at her highest. Her success wasn't a revenge story, he realized. Revenge is a hot, messy, finite emotion. This was different. This was a story of creation. She hadn't focused on destroying Arthur's world. She had been too busy building her own. His collapse was merely a side effect of her rise, a shadow cast by her growing light. Evelyn looked out the vast window at the glittering cityscape. She had once felt so small in this city, invisible beside a man who demanded all the light for himself. Now she knew the truth. The brightest light doesn't need to be demanded. It simply needs to be created. And from now on, she would be the one to create it. And so Arthur Penhaligon became a footnote in Evelyn Reed's incredible story. He learnt the hard way that a person's worth is not defined by the label on their clothes, but by the substance of their character and the strength of their spirit. Evelyn's triumph wasn't just in her success, but in her refusal to become like the man who wronged her. She found her power not in public revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable excellence of her work. Her story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most extraordinary things to show the world. What did you think of Evelyn's ultimate comeback? Was it a perfect act of poetic justice, or would you have wanted a more direct confrontation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. If this story of quiet triumph and self-made success resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a story of true empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another real-life drama that will leave you thinking long after it's over. Thank you for listening.